everybody, welcome back to week 2 of Watercolor Lively Landscapes, and I'd like for us to focus today on composition and doing a few little tonal sketches. Maybe it's got some texture in there, so we have a plan for where we're going. We worked last week on just color washing with the 4 colors and the 4 brushes that we had, just to get familiar with how the water flows, how to mix a few colors, and working with those 4 that are traditional in landscapes. You were able to kind of narrow down having too many choices, but you realize how many colors you can make from just a few. So this is just a sketch that I did, a 1-point perspective. There's actually a point here, and I just drew the field lines to it. I want to also have something in the foreground, even though it looks like it's in the middle ground, but it's going to be the thing that's really going to pop in my piece. And then I've got a big bushy hedge over here that's going to have a lot of texture. My horizon line is in the back, and there's going to be just some haze here, but I think this is where I can actually do some really interesting sky technique. But I want to focus too on the negative bright light space. So I'm going to take some rubber cement and mascoid and put it here while I'm working on the rest of the project, and then I can rub that off. So I started by taking my watercolor paper, I've clipped it down, and I have started adding just some rubber cement. I took it, I've been rubbing it all over this area in the sky. So if you have a picture that definitely has a lot of light sky that you want to keep white and be able to let that be your contrast in your picture, go ahead and do that. You can also use Frisket Mask Liquid. This is Dr. Phil Martin's that I like to use a lot. You can get a little bit more line drawing with it. You could also use a funky fuzzy brush or a twig or something dipped in here and get some crazy lines as well, and so that might be fun. But I could do that right around my little hedge here. I also have in my sketch a couple of where the water is pooling. You know, maybe it's the field has just been watered, and so I would like that to be a bright light too. So I'm going to take my Frisket and put it right here. If you don't have this kind of thing readily available because it wasn't on your supply list, you can always paint around these areas, but mark them on your paper that these are going to be a bright white area that you don't want to fill in. It's hard to see, I know, because that's white, but I'll get it closer and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, I could have used a wax crayon there too. It's just harder to get the wax off. You might want to just leave it in place when you're done. And I'm going to let that dry. All of that needs to dry before I start painting. I'll be getting back out the 4 colors that we were familiar with from last week, and I'll be putting them into my tray. My tray is still a little dirty from last week, and all you need to do is dip your napkin into the water, and then you can take away some of the stuff you were mixing over here in the side trays. This is where your paint goes, so you want to keep this free to mix up your colors. We're going to be starting with the lightest colors first in that sky, just like we did last week. So I'm probably going to have some blue, which I have right there. I could put a little bit more in there, but I really want to keep it light. I can always come back and add more layers to it. And some yellow. I think I've still got some yellow in there. And the burnt sienna looks like it's right there, and the alizarin is there too, so I don't need to worry about that. You're going to want to have your brushes handy. There's a number 6 round I've got my big one, my number 12. I have my rigger, and it seems like there was one more in the mix. And my 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch flat brush. This is also called an aquarelle, and it has an interesting little thing here that I can show you later how I can use it to scratch some texture, like for the weeds on there. So this will be a good project of making sure that you've set up a nice composition. You could use those cropping boards again so that you could test your picture to make sure you like how it looks. So you could get out some pieces of paper, you could get it closer. You might be working from a calendar picture. Here's one that I was considering. I was considering something like this. And there's very little light back here, and that's where I would have put the mascoid or the rubber cement. I would have put some right in here because I want to keep that bright. And I think that'll allow me to have high contrast between this and these dark evergreens. So find some pictures that you definitely want to keep something bright and white. Okay, so I'm just going to let this dry, and I will come back and we'll start painting. So I'm continuing to let this mascoid dry, and I've even applied some of it with a stick. You could use a twig or a stick. So let's say that you want to have some kind of interesting pattern or shape with your space that you want to keep completely white, because there's no way I'm going to be able to come back and make this completely white unless I go and invest in a white. So the trick is to try to mask out the things that you know you're going to want to keep bright and airy. Okay, so now that I've applied those things, you know what, you could even use a twisty tie too to apply it and put it on. If you just need some kind of thinner point than what comes out of the tube or the brush, right? Because that's pretty thick and wide of a brush, and this is like a dropper of a brush. So you might want to do that. Okay, so we got the mask on. Now I'm going to put on some medium to dark washes of color onto my landscape. And what I'd love to do is take my big brush, my number 12 round, and I'm going to dip it into the water. And I've got my 4 colors here. I've got my new gamboge here, and I have the Alzarian crimson, and I have phyllo blue, and last but not least some burnt sienna. So I am going to just put a light little wash onto the sky. I want this to be kind of a winter scene, I decided. And you could make yourself a little scratch sheet of colors that you think you might want to use with these 4. In other words, you could make 8 colors instead of 4 and have kind of a color scheme figured out. I'm just going to lightly put on a little bit of blue. I want to still put some weights behind my drawing so that I definitely get some kind of gravitational pull going on there, where it's just not going to make a pool of water. I want it to pull in one direction. I have it clipped down. I'm going to have to move the clips from time to time to get underneath them. You see, it's just going to glide right over my masking. So this is going to stay very bright and airy. Or I could, after I rub off the masking, make it a different color. I could do all kinds of interesting things with it. So I'm just going to go right over the masking. Let it be your friend. If you don't have masking, you could use a white crayon, which I had in my hand just a minute ago. things tend to get lost on my table. And that could be really helpful if you want to make like just little dots with your wax crayon, and you know those areas are going to stay light and bright in the end. So I'm going to move this clip. I'll just move it down here where I know there's going to be something dark right there. See, I'm already liking how this is coming out. Yeah. Maybe I'll make a little purple with the blue and red. I want it to be a cooler sky in the dead of winter. I want to think, since it's summer here where I live right now, it's nice to think of some cooler weather. Okay. And if I want it to be just a tad darker, and cooler, I can do that, but I think I'll wait and do that on my second pass. Okay, so now I'm going to work on this big clump of trees, or a big bush is really what it is. Okay, so I'm going to make up some green over here. Just a nice little wash. You could use your hands to kind of make some texture and some pattern. You could spray it lightly. It's some interesting pattern just from the spray bottle. You can see what it's doing. And I don't have to worry about it getting into my sky. I don't really care if it gets into my field here because that's going to be very earthy too. Just using a water bottle. Okay. Alright, now I'm going to work on the rose. And I'm going to paint from the 1 point perspective. Here's my point. So the one that's closest to the horizon line is going to be a little bit lighter. And I'm going to darken up just a tad. I have to remember too that it's dead time of the year. So I'm going to put some of that sienna in there. I could even alternate. Painting with the point of the perspective. So it's ever so slightly. This one just has a little bit more sienna in it than this one does. I kept this one the lightest, closer to the horizon. Okay, so I just need to let this dry. I need to go up here and work on the sky again. So I could do some brushing, some splattering. I don't know if you like to splatter paint as much as I do, but it could be kind of fun to do. Bit of moisture in the air. Okay, and now I want to switch to my number 6, and I'm going to get a little bit of yellow on there, like the sun's going down more. I'm just going to dab at that. It's just going to be that little bit of hint that I want. Create like a burnt orange. But not too much because I really want this to be more of a winter sky. And I want this little thing to glow here. Okay. Alright, I think I'm going to go back now and deepen up some of these rows, especially in between the rows. Where it's been plowed. And barely touching the surface. At the very tip of this brush. This brush can be your friend to make really fine lines. I could also use my rigger. And I can twirl it and make an even finer line like that. But it's dirt, so I don't want to make too fine a line. I do have some tape down here, just to show you could have taped the whole thing down. I don't love doing the tape thing, but just in case I rip my paper at the end, I don't want to do that when I'm pulling tape. So I prefer to just clip. Okay. Could just spray that a little bit, dirty it up. And I could, if it were wet, like this guy over here, I'll put a little bit more green into it. I don't want it to be too green, so I'm going to come back and dirty it up. But I want to put this plastic on here now to get some more lines inside my bush. Okay, and I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to let this dry for a bit, and then I'm going to come back and do some more deeper layers. So I'm also putting a little water. Before I take the mask off, I'm going to put a little water in a saucer, and I'm going to mix up some of my blue with the purple. I kind of like this purple already. Put some red over there. A lot of the blue on there. Okay. And I'm just going to spray all of that. So what I'm doing is I'm making some paint that I can actually pour onto the canvas. It gives me a nice little eggplant color there. Remember, I'm trying to do more of the winter. I'm going to have to move this just slightly while I'm doing this process. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to pour a little bit. It's wanting to run to the edge of the paper. It's actually going onto my sketch over there. Okay, if some of it runs down, you're going to catch it pretty quickly. I love doing little pours like this. This is what I meant by the abstract part of this lesson. Things that you wouldn't think you would want to do that can cause a little more interest in your painting. Yes, it's going to want to run to the edges of your paper, so you want to kind of catch that. Okay, I think I still want to have a little bit more of the violet. I'm just using a foam plate. And that's going to give me that contrast I'm looking for between where I masked and where I am actually. Hope you can see that. Let me back this up a little bit so you can see that. You probably weren't even seeing that the whole time. Okay, so you can see that I've let some things drip down onto the canvas putting paint onto the foam and just letting it drip. Let's try it one more time because I think my picture might have been out of the frame. That's no fun. So I'm putting some red, some of the blue on there. just let that drip. Create some interest in my painting. Now maybe I want to do that a little bit over here in this little side field. So I'm going to pick up some sienna and some of the green. Yes, have something to catch all the drips coming down. Ways to make different textures. Okay, so I'm dirtying this up a lot. Still gonna have that realist looking tree over the top at the very end, but this is my backdrop. Okay, I'm gonna let this dry. Then I'm gonna come back and do another wash of color with my brush. Yay! So I have rubbed off a lot of the mascoid after it dried, or actually that was rubber cement in this area. I only have mascoid right here in this spot. So I'm going to leave that for now, but I'm just going to add back on a little bit more of this rubber cement into the edges here. And I'm going to let that dry. So it's kind of a layering effect just because I still want to keep some bright white, but I really want to change colors is what I'm getting at. I'm going to add a little bit of warm color to this cool scene, like it's radiating from the sun here. So I'm going to add this back in and let that dry. All about layers with watercoloring. I bet you never thought about that. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll come back and we're going to pour some warm colors into here. Okay, so I've pulled some of the masking off. I've rubbed it off with my fingers, and then I reapplied a little bit more where I really wanted to keep it light. The next thing I want to do is just add a little bit of warmth to the sky. So I put some of the new gamboge and the crimson into my plate along with some water. And I'm just going to mix that up ever so slightly. And I'm going to pour this into my sky. I've got some napkins ready so that I can actually kind of sop it up as I go. Alright, so let's see what happens when I put a little bit of this in there. You can pick up the board and try to shift things around. I just think that that's going to be pretty in the sky. Let that kind of move around a little bit. It's a process for sure. So it's not something you just sit down one afternoon and get it all done when you're working with masking and layering. So that ought to be kind of fun. And I can actually take my spray bottle make it just a little bit more atmospheric. And I think I'm going to take some of this and just put some of that brightness right there. See how it's just going to look like the sun's going down, even on a cold winter day. Some of the best sunsets are in the winter time, I find. Yay! Okay. Now it's a little pooling right there, so I'm gonna just let some of that sop up. Okay, I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'm going to draw my tree on top of there. And I'm gonna rub away the rest of the masking once it's dry. And I'm going to keep on working too on the bottom field here and really kind of make it cold and dead and ready for this spring planting. So I'll be back. So I'm going to work now on my tree after my orange is already dry where I wanted it, and I'm now going to put my tree in, which you see over here from my sketch. And I'm going to use my number 6 to draw with, and then I might switch to the rigger. So I'm going to use a little bit of the sienna with the blue to make that dark color that I want. And I'm just going to dip into the water here, and it's going to be so fun. Get the blue going there. The brown. See, I can get that really dark. I'm not using black. There's no reason to use black. Black is an opaque color. Alright, so my tree is going to start about right here at the base of the big bush. And you always start at the root, or how the tree grows, how anything grows if it's a flower, and work your way up. I like to think of trees as a Y shape, so I'm just going to start taking it in the Y direction. And I'll draw another Y off of that one. You're welcome to use my picture as your inspiration if you want, or you might have a calendar picture that you like. Just find something where you're getting that lightness that you want to portray, and something that's really dark in the foreground, like my tree, so that you can practice using the masking to keep something really light. I'm barely touching the paper to make the Y strokes in the branches. Barely touching. Some of it's going over some residual mascoid that I purposely left on there just so I could get a few white spots. And those Y's are going to get really tiny up into the sky. Probably an oak tree of some sort. That's lost all its leaves in the winter time. So maybe I'll make them a little more scraggly lines rather than Great. So you can see where that masking is present because it's skipping lines, but I love that because that means it's going to be more atmospheric in the background with just little broken lines because of the masking behind it. So we've gotten used to working with 4 brushes, 4 colors. Now we're working on what it means to get something really dark and really light. Since we're not using white, we're letting the paper be the white. And I showed you how to mix up a really dark color, which is what I'm using here. Not too difficult. I did have a photograph of a field with this tree, and all I did was do a sketch of it to identify what I wanted to make the darkest, the medium, and what I wanted to be bright white. Like, I have not rubbed off this mascoid yet to make that bright white. It's still there. I love trees. This would be a fun one then to do into fall. So I could take this same scene and then make a whole pouring of oranges and yellows to make all the leaf covering with less white masked. Okay. Now I'm going to get a little bit more free with it. And I watered it down just a bit. Just a bit. So I think the thing that I want to then focus on next is just some of the craziness going on in this bush. And then I want to focus too on some of the tree line way back there. Okay, and I could also use my aquarelle and drag some of that while it's still wet. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna kind of let this dry a little bit, and then I might mask again, and if I want to add more blues or oranges into the sky over here. So I'm gonna let this dry, and we'll come back.